If you take a look at any advertisement for women's beauty products in today's age, you will notice that they all have one thing in common. The use of digital enhancement software, also known to the commoner as Photoshop. The use of Photoshop in the past decade, and as much as the past 50 years, has absolutely plagued the sense of beauty in the average woman. A woman living in today's culture might become self-conscious of their image as seen by the public because of this false sense of beauty that advertisements have created through both Photoshop and other techniques. Our culture has created this myth that women have to look thin, sexy, and virtually flawless all the time, and the pressure that this has put on women has been immense, to say the least. Now, what did this originate from, and why did this change occur? For that, let's take a look at the change in modeling over the past half century. Many say that this cultural revolution all began with the blonde bombshell or Marilyn Monroe. Monroe was one of the first women to be overtly sexual yet play sweet, naive, and innocent characters at the same time. Prior to the 50s, the bulk of feminine film characters were composed of brunettes like Theda Bara or innocent blondes. Monroe is also the very first woman to be featured in the centerfold of a Playboy magazine. By becoming a sex symbol within mainstream acceptance and therefore making film and society more permissive of sex, Marilyn progressed the sexual freedoms of women. In the 60s, fashion model Leslie Lawson, also known as Twiggy for a twig-like structure, shifted the image of models. At her modeling peak, she was just 5 feet 7 inches and weighed a mere 91 pounds. This is where we get to see the emergence of unnaturally thin models. Skipping forward to the mid-80s, a stunning statistic was recorded. The average model weighed 23% less than the average American woman. This myth of beauty was just beginning to bloom. Leaving the 80s and going into the 90s, the quote supermodel became increasingly popular in the media, and in essence this is what really blossomed the so-called beauty that we know of today. Supermodels are really no different than the average model, except for the fact that they are popular amongst media and thus with American television sets, and get paid substantially more. Supermodels such as Cindy Crawford dominated magazine covers, fashion runways, editorial pages, and both print and broadcast advertising. In the process, supermodels would make upwards of $10 to $20 million every year. The popularity, the treatment, and the high salary is what attracted the younger generation of women. As a result, they wanted to make themselves look identical to the models by any means. This lifestyle eventually carried on into the late 90s and then into the early millennium, and resulted in people going through drastic measures to achieve so-called beauty. Examples of this are going through body modification surgeries such as liposuction, plastic surgery, or Botox. Nowadays, advertisements for women's products are pretty much guaranteed to contain these flawless models and perfect bodies, and this alone has a large impact on the way our society interacts. Now, in the media-saturated society we live in today, the average American is exposed to advertising on almost a daily basis. The typical American may see advertisements on pretty much everything they interact with throughout the day. Some of the mediums in which companies are trying to reach their consumers are cell phones, text messages, applications, the internet, magazines, newspapers, televisions, food, buildings, clothing, billboards, cars, trucks, pamphlets, and other unique ways that we have not seen yet. See, even right now I'm advertising for Windows. It's just that easy for companies. Yet Americans are constantly being fed with this idea of sexy is with a barrage of advertisements that they cannot seem to escape the grip from. The fact that we have been raised and pampered in the surrounding culture is tainting our idea of beauty in the average woman and narrowing and changing our priorities in society. Instead of valuing the social, economic, and environmental issues that people in the past have devoted much more time to, our modern-day society values entertainment and fashion much, much more. For example, we are trying to catch up with what our friends are doing through Facebook or trying to stay in touch with the latest new fashion trend instead of worrying about political issues such as the next president of the US that are currently ongoing. This shift in culture has arisen all because of this change in beauty and modeling over the past 50 years. The issues that have arisen as a result of this change in both modeling and thus advertising have been plentiful and have certainly affected our day-to-day values in our society. The US is a capitalistic society, so big businesses thrive on consumer purchases. As a result, companies need to advertise to publicize their product. However, the means in which they promote their product should not be altering images to create a false perception of what women should look like. Some countries, such as Israel, have already enacted a Photoshop Act to help reduce the amount of digitally altered images in advertising, thus will decrease the amount of images that contain this flawless beauty that we have become so accustomed to. Currently, legislation in the U.S. is trying to pass an act similar to the one that Israel has. However, this is only one of the many steps that needs to be taken by the U.S. to cure the nation of this so-called beauty myth. Hopefully in the future, within the next decade or so, as unlikely as it sounds, we will eventually shift from a primarily entertainment-based society to a more issue and controversy-based society that worries more about current events rather than fashion and appearance.